In my view, George Steinbrenner was the real Yankee Doodle Dandy. He, after all, won 7 rings, if I'm not mistaken. He owned this team and saw them win 7 rings from the 70s and the 90s, then 2000 and 2009. Less than a year after they won that ring in 2009, we got the news on this very day, July 13th, 2010, that he had passed away. Beyond the newspaper articles, beyond any photos that might have been, had during that time, and there's only one of Mr. Steinbrenner, Rudy, marching, and I'm there, right there, little, 8 or 9 years old, 8-year-old, and, all of a sudden, my dad and I are up in George Steinbrenner's suite on Old Timers Day 2000, and all of a sudden, the friendship grows into a spot on the bus in the 2000 parade. All of a sudden, Mr. Steinbrenner's generosity continues to get through getting an executive pass in 2002. Before that, he took us down to the locker room the day Roger Clemens passed Walter Johnson. All of a sudden, his generosity, I remember him saying very clearly, do you want to be outside, watch the game, or here with me? Well, I was young, but I knew spending time at that big oak round table that George Steinbrenner would literally hold court on, was where the place to be. And so, at about 9, then 10, then 11, then 12, I would always stick around that table and listen to what the brass of the Yankees were talking about. Kind of give suggestions to Mr. Steinbrenner. But there was another moment that stuck out. There are 2 moments that go beyond the headlines, which shows that he had my dad up there for a purpose, not just to watch a game, but to really see growth in this life. And would you believe the owner of the Yankees, George Steinbrenner, and I'm sure he did this with his grandkids, with his kids, the guy who has all the, as I mentioned before, bravado, all the, airtime, if you will. One day in spring training, he says to me, so you're doing your homework? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, always, he basically said, always focus on school. Yes, the owner of the Yankees, who was busy running a business, took this little kid from New York aside and said, always focus on school and always do your homework. He wanted education to come first. And do you know, he would pay for kids' educations, whether in the Yankee family or of slaying cops in Tampa, and I believe New York City as well. So, whatever you might have thought of him, and when I talk about him, I just don't want to be name-dropping him. That's not the point. And that I post about him. It's because there are real memories there that would take beyond 5 minutes to talk about. And I've loved having Jim Bombeck on today when, he talked about my story with Mr. Steinbrenner, Bill the Baker's story with Mr. Steinbrenner, Rene Groen's story with Mr. Steinbrenner. We wouldn't all just name drop them. There are real stories behind the goodness of George Steinbrenner. And 12 years later, that's the message I want to convey. That no matter the posts, no matter the podcasts about him, there are real stories to the life of George Steinbrenner and the kindness of George Steinbrenner. And that has to be hit home. That's one of the ways we continue his memory. And you know what? There are still people at Yankee Stadium today that continue his spirit, that continue what he built as far as generosity goes toward Mr. Steinbrenner's, extended family, if you will. And I always love seeing Haley, I always love seeing Jenny, I always love seeing Jesse and Hank Well, and how now, unfortunately, Hank's passed. But when I talk about him, I don't want to come off as talking about him in a boastful way. No, it's because beyond those pictures of the New York Post, there are real stories to tell about how he wanted me right at that table. He offered me a seat at the table, as he did many kids that were not his own grandkids or kids, that were actually friends and family. He offered that seat at the table. He offered Ray that seat at the table. And look at the trajectory of lives impacted by George Steinbrenner. As I've said before, his generosity allowed me down at the stadium, let me connect with Bob Wolf, who helped build what is now this podcast through Bob Wolf's mentorship. Also at Viscardi. That was a big connection there. But because we saw Bob Wolf at the basement of Yankee Stadium, he said, you know what, call me every Saturday and I will mentor you. He said that at Yankee Stadium. So I believe that connection was possible. Regis Philbin, that connection in 2003, not possible without Mr. George Steinbrenner. Our connection at Naira, the racetrack, not possible without the goodness and the kindness of George Steinbrenner. And while I will always honor him, I would say my dad being in the right place at the right time for meeting Mr. Steinbrenner was also a catalyst for this 10-year friendship. I almost can't believe it's 12 years. Time is flying, and thanks be to God, we're still healthy enough on this earth to honor him every year on July 13th. But when I name drop him, I'm not just name dropping him. And I think people get the idea. I am. No. There's a purpose to it, because every time you mention him, you invoke all the opportunities, all the kindness, all the generosity that, yes, the owner of the Yankees, George M. Steinbrenner III, imparted not just to Ray, to others. Ray calls it reclamation projects, but to the nation through his acts of kindness. That he did say he did not want one good act to be known, because he just felt that generosity should not be made a big deal. But of course, over time, people want to tell their stories. And we will continue to tell our stories about how George Steinbrenner welcomed us into his family. And yes, the Yankee family, but it was George Steinbrenner's family, first and foremost. And on this date, he would have been, on July 4th, he would have been 92. July 4th. So, the man born on July 4th, 1930, owned the Yankees. Can it get any more Yankee Doodle dandy than that? We miss you, Mr. Steinbrenner. And please, Yankees, win today in his honor, or just to stop the losing streak as well. Come on now. You lose to the Reds last night? What is that? Come on. You're going strong here. Don't dip. Small dips, not huge losing streak dips. Win tonight for the boss. Win tonight to give a chance at the series for MB. I guess the proper word there. MB. Yankee Doodle Dandy.